In this video, we're just going to give you a bit of a progress update, just so we can sort of see where I'm at the moment, and a bit of an introduction about the best ways to remove paint off the metal. All right, so let's start with the motor. You've seen in the previous videos that we've got all of this put together, and it actually runs. It runs fine. I've got a gauge fitted here for oil pressure and also temperature, just so we kind of monitor those as it was running up. The distributor I've got in here, it's a second-hand unit, but it's a point style. On my classic Mini, I've got an electronic distributor, but this one works fine for now. The alternator does not work. Starter motor's fine, everything else is fine, so just I'll order a new alternator. So far there's no issues with any leaks, no oil leaks, no coolant leaks, and coolant is okay. I'll just have a look in there. If you look in the top there, there's a bit of debris and a bit of, I don't know what it is really, but there's no oil in the water, so that's a good sign. This radiator was a second-hand unit, and it wasn't like, it was flushed out but not professionally cleaned. So there is a bit of dirt and stuff in there, but no oil. Using a torch shining in at the top, there's no oil. You can see the sort of the oil colours when it's if there is contamination, but so far that's good. Everything okay. Oil pressure is fine, and carburetor rebuild works fine as well. So there's no major issues there. The only issue is running it. I don't have the exhaust and muffler, so it is a bit noisy, but it's not that much noisier than a boat motor. So if you've watched any of the previous videos, you'll know that I've done a lot of work with the subframes. Front subframe is fully built up, same as the rear subframe. So once the body gets sorted and painted, it's going to be a very quick process of just putting it all together. I just want to point out now the rollover jig, or the rotisserie that I'm using here. I constructed this one myself. So there's a website called Moke, and there's some useful information on there. Also in the forums as well. There's a few designs that people have put up in those to explain the best way to build it. So if I'll just tilt it up, and then you'll be able to get a better view of how things look. So it's a very basic construction. So far it's holding and it hasn't fallen off it. A lot of the square tubes I just purchased from Bunnings. I've got like a bracket here to give it a bit more strength. This long tube here from Bunnings too. The price of their steel is probably double what you'd be paying at a steel work, but it's more convenient to get it from there. The way I've got this bolted on, it just bolts on through the rear section. There's a couple of bolt holes where I believe they're for seats. You could build this other ways and use these the subframe mounts and connect it. It'll be more secure, but it's just up to you what you want to be able to do. And then on the front end is a bit more complicated. I'll just take you a bit closer. All right, so the way the front works, this base section is pretty much the same thing. It's just square tubes. There's a rounder pipe at the top, and then this one sits into it. These sections here, I sort of had to construct these to bolt into where the subframe comes up onto the bulkhead. And the way I've sort of designed this tube is so that you've got room to sort of get in here and paint everything. So it's pretty much the only parts that's touching are where the actual subframe bolts and covers onto. So that's allowed me to prepare all of this. That's all been taken down to metal and then etch primed. And then this section here, that bolts onto where the subframe mounts to. Okay, so from this angle you can sort of see how the internal part works. So you've got the main stand, then obviously this long pipe which sits inside there. It's a bit loose, but for the purpose of this, it doesn't have to be a nice tight fit. It just needs to be able to fit in there and be supported. There's bolts on here, so that can come out when I'm disassembling it. Makes things a bit easier. And then of course there's room to sort of get around and paint everything, so it doesn't get in the way. The only parts that are covered up are where the subframe bolts onto, so they can be done afterwards once it's removed off the rotisserie. All right, so I'll just take you to a different angle. One of the things with sandblasting, because there's a gap in here, every time I rotate it, you hear a crunching noise, but that's not a major issue. It's nicely balanced on here too. All right, so let's talk about the underneath. The main floor panel, that was all replaced. This section here too, so the floor for the side boxes, and then this one as well. And then of course the fuel tank sits into this cavity. There's also a cover that goes over the fuel tank, and then there are holes here. The fuel tank cover bolts in, and you'll see the heads of them bolts on the other side of the Moke, just where the actual the angle of the sidewall meets. There'll be some holes for that to go into. Overall, this part is all done. I'm still going to add a few more welds just to make it a little bit more stronger, give it a bit more support, especially sort of under here. All right, and then on the rear section, this will all need to be taken back to metal and then etch primed. The other thing I've included are these just little bolts, just to tighten down, just to prevent it moving. One thing I always do, just to make sure things are a bit safe, or safe as it can get, I've got some milk crates, and just in case one of the ends, for whatever reason, drops off, these will capture the Moke if it falls off, and then just to support it. But so far the welds have been good. There's no cracks or issues in any of these welds. The good thing about this rotisserie is that once I've finished the project, it's unlikely that I'll do another Moke, but we'll wait and see. But I'll be able to easily sell this, recover the cost of the steel, and sell it on to someone that can make use of it. Okay, so as you can see, there is still a fair amount of old paint that I'll still need to remove. So the easiest way, if you've got the equipment, is just to sandblast it. That'll take it back to bare metal. The good thing about sandblasting is anywhere where you've got rust like that, surface rust, sandblasting will just get that back down to bare metal. The other alternative is to use a range of different power tools to remove the paint. Then if you haven't got nice clean metal, you can rust treat it with various different products for rust treating. They're all sort of acid based, and they sort of eat into the surface and the rust, leaving the surface, the metal exposed. All right, so let me just talk about some of the tools. In order to sand this back down to metal, you can just use a DA sander, and then put a smaller grit on there. Something like even a 60 would be good, just to sort of cut through that first layer. Depending on the types of panels you got, there's going to be different ways. So obviously for a large flat panel, that would be useful. The other option is using one of these wheels on a angle grinder. This angle grinder is battery operated, so it's not as noisy as the plug-in one, but it has less power, which in a way is a good thing, because you don't want to cut through this too much. I'll just show you one of these sanding pads. These, the flappy discs, these are useful on a angle grinder if you're grinding down welds. That is too harsh just to use on that to remove the paint. You end up just cutting into the metal too much. So don't use one of those. The attachment, and I've got the one I've got on the grinder at the moment. I've purchased these from Bunnings. This one here is a different variation, and they're called a twist knot bevel brush. So that allows you to remove paint very quickly, and it doesn't really make much of a indentation into the actual metal itself. It doesn't put lots of scratches in there. If you keep it in the one spot for too long, it probably will. But I found that is very effective, and it's very quick at removing the old paint. For spots where you sort of need to get into a little bit more detail, just a standard wire wheel on the drill, that does a good job at just getting into any tight spots. And a larger wire wheel too. The other type of attachment that I have the other attachment is this one here. That, of course, bolts onto the angle grinder, and it's, if you look at the shape of the brush there, that's good for going over it when you're finished one of the panels, and then it just to clean it over the whole thing to get rid of any more surface rust that's not removed. So I found the most effective way for me is to use a combination of these tools depending on the paint surface, and then the final stage use my sandblaster, because my compressor, it's okay, but it's not fantastic. It doesn't have the power running off a 10 amp outlet to be able to just start off with working on that directly. I mean, you can do it, but it's a very slow process. The whole overall process is quicker to use one of these tools, get it down to bare metal, and then go over it with the sandblaster to get rid of like the surface rust, which is sort of embedded. Okay, one of the methods I haven't really spoken too much about is using paint stripper. Paint stripper is good for areas where you want to just, it depends, so using paint stripper, it's not going to make as much noise as using the power tools, but in order to penetrate the surface, you still need to use probably the wire wheel at least on the drill, just to go over the surface, to scratch up the paint, to allow the chemical to get in there. So you're still going to need some tools with that. But then again, it just depends on the surface. Like this paint is very old on here and very flaky. So depending on the condition, if it's really thick, the paint stripper might be a good starting point just to sort of break things down a bit. All right, so let's try out some of these tools, and then we'll see what works best. All right, so the way I'm going to do this, I'll just do it in a few different sections, just so we can sort of see how things work. So we'll try using the orbital sander. This has got an 80 grit pad on there. The other thing that's important too, you need to wear a face mask or face shield, and also a mask as well, because the dust is not good to breathe, especially if it's an older vehicle and there is lead in the paint. So let me just get these fitted, and then we'll get started and try that out. Depending on what tool you're using, you might want to use a pair of ear plugs as well. All right, I just need to secure this to stop it spinning. Okay. All right, so that was the 80 grit orbital. Wasn't that effective really, so let's just try the next tool. All right. Okay, so the angle grinder with that attachment on there, it does cut it through nice and quickly. It doesn't do too much damage to the surface, and it removes the paint. So for this panel, if I was to, there's a few different layers here. It's been painted yellow twice. And then obviously the original green isn't in there anymore. If I was to paint strip this panel first, just to get rid of this top layer, because it is very thick, I think that it would be more effective using that tool. And then of course the last one is just the drill with a wire wheel. The sizes are for different areas that you want to get into, but I'll just give you an idea of how this one works. If you're going to paint strip, just going over the body, and obviously you'd use a larger size, just to roughen up the paint, cut into it. That'll increase the surface area to allow the chemical to penetrate. So for this, in this particular case, I would suggest paint stripping it first to loosen it up, and then go over with the wire wheel or this attachment on the grinder, and that would be the most effective way. So I won't bore you with watching me do that process, but I'll give it a go. I'll probably will paint strip it first and then come back and then grind it the next day. Okay, so what I've done here, I've put some plastic wrap over there. It's just to stop the chemical from evaporating too quickly. It gives it time to react with the actual paint surface. This section here I went over with the grinding wheel on the drill, the wire wheel, just to see the difference between not using the wire wheel and using the wire wheel. This bit here wasn't wire wheeled. And then we'll just compare and just see if the paint comes off easier. Okay, so this paint stripper has been sitting for a bit now. What I want to do is, we'll just, first of all, just see how much it's loosened up the paint by. All right, so this is the section that was the wire wheel went on there to sort of grind it down a bit. So it is, you can see it's got through that first layer, but this stuff is pretty thick. This paint is very thick. Some sections like that are nice and loose. So it's taken off the top layer, but then you've got this light yellow layer underneath. So the best option for this section here would be to remove that top layer and then scratch it up a bit and then add some more paint stripper. Or you may just be able to add the paint stripper directly to it, but it doesn't just peel right back straight away. So some parts of this car, it has done that, and it's been really easy to remove it, but like here, it wasn't that effective. Now, this section over here, again, it wasn't really scratched down. I just applied the paint stripper directly to the actual top layer of paint, and it's barely even penetrated it at all. Over here, it sort of worked a bit better. It's worked really well there. If there was little chips in the paint, it's improved it because obviously the chemical can penetrate a lot better. So it's not that effective here. And the paint stripper I'm using, it's proper automotive paint stripper from a automotive paint supplier. And then again up here, it's bits of it are coming off, but not all of it. So the part that worked the best was actually here, where we've penetrated or hit it with the wire wheel, because it does come off much easier. So the wire wheel is the best way, then the paint stripper, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so we're at the stage now where all of that has been etch primed, and that's looking nice. Next thing to do now is to sort out, I'll do this side here first, get that the paint taken off there and get that etch primed, and then the next stage is to just start working on the internal part, remove that old paint, sandblast it, and then etch prime it. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching my videos.